Welcome to TTIOT, the show that proves anyone can have opinions. Have you ever wondered what really drives our money system? What if Australia's debt-based economy operates a lot like a pyramid scheme, constantly relying on new debt to keep going? Today, we'll uncover who wins, who struggles, and why understanding this matters to every Australian. Let's get this circus started.
Have you ever taken out a loan, maybe for a house or a car, and just wondered about the sort of invisible mechanics behind it all? Or maybe you felt that pinch of rising debt yourself and thought, hang on, how does this whole system actually work?
It's a common question, definitely.
Yeah, and when I first read this analysis we're looking at today, the idea that our nation's money system, Australia specifically, could share striking similarities with a pyramid scheme, that was fascinating.
Genuinely, it's a bold claim, a very provocative one.
It really is, and that's the claim we're diving into today. Our mission really is to unpack this analysis. It argues that Australia's debt-based monetary system operates structurally a bit like a pyramid scheme.
We'll be looking at the mechanics, who wins, who loses.
Exactly, and the potential future implications. And importantly, this isn't just, someone's wild theory.
No, not at all.
It's built on official data. We're talking RBA, ABS, major banks, combined with economic principle, some from MMT, modern monetary theory, which looks at government's role in money.
And broader historical monetary analysis, too. So solid foundations for the argument, even if the conclusion is startling.
Right. So the core argument, the absolute heart of it from the source's executive summary is this. Australia runs on a debt-based system. Structurally, it's strikingly similar to a pyramid scheme.
And it's built on two key pillars. Fractional reserve banking.
Where banks only keep a fraction of deposits, right?
Exactly. And fiat currency. Money backed essentially by government decree and, crucially, public trust, not gold or silver.
And the analysis argues the system needs constant debt expansion just to keep functioning.
Which leads to this concept the source calls the debt treadmill, and is more than just a catchy phrase.
Okay, tell us about that.
It describes a mechanism, really, that leads to these exponentially growing obligations for households. It just keeps accumulating.
While benefiting who?
Well, simultaneously and pretty consistently, it benefits the financial institutions at the top. Think of it like the more debt gets pumped in, the faster that treadmill spins.
Making it harder for regular people to keep up.
Precisely. Often just to pay back what they already owe, plus the interest.
That really goes against what I think many of us learned in school, doesn't it?
It does.
The old idea that banks are just intermediaries. They take deposits from savers, lend them out, and the Reserve Bank controls the total amount.
That's the textbook version, yeah. But it's not quite how it works in practice.
So if that traditional view is wrong, how fundamental is that change to understanding how money is actually created?
Oh, it changes everything, completely. The reality, and this is confirmed by, the Bank of England, even the RBA acknowledges this.
Yeah.
It's quite different.
Okay, so how does it really work?
Well, when you go for a loan, the bank doesn't check its vaults for spare cash or look at existing deposits.
No.
No, they create new money, digitally. They literally just type the numbers into your account. Poof, new money exists.
Okay. Wow. But here's the kicker you mentioned.
Yes, and this is absolutely crucial. They create the loan principal, let's say $100,000 for your loan.
Right.
But they do not create the interest that will be owed on that loan. Right. Say an extra $30,000 over the years. That interest money isn't created at the same time.
So, wait, if the bank only creates the $100,000, where does the $30,000 to pay the interest eventually come from?
Exactly the question. It has to come from somewhere else in the money supply.
Which means?
It has to come from other people taking out new loans, more principal being created.
Yeah.
Because only the principal is newly created by banks. There's never enough money in the system in total to cover both all the principal and all the interest owed.
So the system needs constant new borrowing just for people to be able to pay the interest on the old borrowing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It inherently creates a kind of scarcity of the money needed to pay interest, forcing constant new borrowing. And that is the engine of the debt treadmill.
Okay, that's a really fundamental point. Let's ground this in some numbers for Australia. What does this look like in real terms?
The numbers are pretty stark.
Looking at 2024 data, average household debt, it's $261,492.
Per household.
Yeah. Add it all up. Total household debt for the whole country, $2.66 trillion.
Trillion. It's hard to even grasp.
And it puts Australia's debt-to-income ratio at 182%. That's a third highest in the OECD, the group of developed nations.
It really highlights the pressure.
It's a lot to unpack, isn't it? When you see numbers like that, you realize the financial tightrope so many families are walking.
And those numbers, they really paint a detailed picture of the system's mechanics, like you said, and also where the value flows.
Okay, so what about the other side? The banks.
Well, look at the big four banks here in Australia. Together, they pull in around $44.6 billion in pre-tax profits annually.
Wow, $44.6 billion.
And if you break it down per home loan, the source estimates the profit a bank makes over the entire life of a typical mortgage is about $200,800.
200 grand profit on one loan.
Which works out to be roughly 35% of the original loan amount itself, just in profit.
Okay, so those figures clearly show a massive concentration of wealth, of profit, within that financial sector.
Directly linked to this process of debt creation and interest charges.
Right. You know, the source makes this incredibly bold comparison, saying our money system is like a pyramid scheme. What are the actual parallels? What makes that comparison stick, according to the analysis?
Well, the comparison is striking because the structural similarities, when you lay them out, are, well, they're hard to ignore.
Okay, like what?
One of the big ones. The system's survival depends on a constant flow of new participants.
In a pyramid scheme, that's new recruits paying in. Here.
New borrowers taking on new debt. That's the fuel.
Okay, what else?
Just like a pyramid scheme, the early participants think early property buyers who bought low, or the banks themselves. They profit directly from the burdens taken on by those who join later, the new borrowers paying higher prices.
So value flows upwards.
Yes. And then there's the maths. The analysis highlights this mathematical impossibility of indefinite growth. Exponential systems like this, they just can't go on forever. They're unsustainable by definition.
Right, like a pyramid scheme collapsing when recruitment dries up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In both cases, if the recruitment or the new borrowing slows down significantly, the whole structure faces collapse, or at least a major crisis.
Any other parallels?
A couple more key ones. Both systems are fundamentally based on trust and belief. Belief that the dollar will hold value, belief that house prices will keep rising, belief that the scheme will pay out.
Without that trust.
It falters. And in both systems, the benefits are heavily concentrated right at the top.
And finally,
Both require this unsustainable exponential growth just to keep the wheels turning. Not linear growth, exponential.
that's quite a list of similarities. It's powerful laid out like that. But it does bring up a big question. If the parallels are so strong, why does this system keep going? And what are the real-world consequences? Given that it's obviously not an outright scam like a Bernie Madoff scheme, it does create some value, right?
That's the crucial distinction the source makes. It points out one key characteristic that doesn't perfectly align. A pure pyramid scheme, it argues, creates no real value or product. It's just shuffling money upwards.
But our debt money system.
It does facilitate real economic activity. Let's be clear on that. It funds businesses starting up. It builds roads and hospitals through government borrowing. It allows us to buy houses, cars. It fuels the transactions that make the economy hum.
So it's not a perfect match in that sense.
No. While it shares many structural features, it's not a complete one-to-one replica because it does underpin real economic activity. But, and this is important, that difference doesn't negate the impact of the other shared characteristics.
Like the impact on wealth distribution or systemic risk.
Exactly. Those remain significant concerns based on the parallels.
Okay, so let's talk about those impacts then. Who wins, who loses in this setup? The source identifies clear winners at the top of this. Let's call it a structure.
Definitely.
Banks are number one, obviously. They have this unique power to create money from thin air, charge interest on it, earn billions every year doing it.
Can't argue with that.
Then you've got, say, early property owners, people who bought houses years ago. They benefit hugely from asset price inflation, which is largely funded by
all the new borrowers coming in later and bidding up prices with more debt.
Right. Their wealth grows, sometimes massively, without necessarily creating new value themselves. And then other financial institutions, wealth managers, etc.
Yeah, they profit from servicing all that debt, managing the wealth that accumulates.
Yeah.
It's a whole ecosystem built around it.
So those are the winners. What about the losers? Who's at the bottom bearing the brunt?
Well, the analysis points pretty clearly to new borrowers, people trying to get into the market now.
Why them specifically?
They're forced to pay these hugely inflated prices for assets, especially property, mainly by taking on enormous amounts of debt, often for assets that have already shot up in value thanks to earlier waves of borrowing.
Okay. Who else?
Renters, they get increasingly priced out. Homeownership becomes harder and harder to reach because of these debt-fueled asset bubbles.
Makes sense.
And ultimately, you could say future generations lose out too.
Mm.
They inherit higher debt levels across the board, plus these sky-high asset prices. It makes achieving financial stability, building wealth, it's just a much tougher climb for them.
And when we connect this back to your everyday life, the listener's life, the household impact is just undeniable, isn't it?
It really is.
That stat you mentioned earlier, average household debt quadrupled between 2002 and 2022. Quadrupled.
Astonishing growth.
That 182% debt-to-income ratio near record highs. And for many people trying to pay a mortgage, it now eats up, what was it, over half their income.
50.6% of the median income, according to the source's data, just on mortgage payments.
Half. That leads to
Yeah.
huge economic stress, right? Less money for everything else, reduced living standards.
People are running harder and harder just to stay in the same place financially.
And this constant pressure on households, it must have bigger ripples through the whole economy.
Absolutely. There are broader systemic implications. We see these recurring asset bubbles, especially in property, driven largely by debt-fueled speculation rather than just fundamentals.
All right.
This directly fuels growing inequality. Wealth gets concentrated with people who own assets, while those relying on wages find it harder to keep up. The system itself becomes quite fragile, economically speaking.
Fragile how?
It's vulnerable to debt deflation. If borrowing slows or asset prices fall, the whole thing can unwind quite painfully, and ultimately it creates this dependency on growth.
It needs to keep expanding.
Yes. The system requires constant expansion, constant new debt, just to avoid collapsing under the weight of existing interest claims. Stability becomes this perpetual chase.
And underpinning this entire structure, as the source explains it, is fiat currency, money backed by, well, not much besides government say-so and public faith.
That's right.
So if trust is really the bedrock of our Aussie dollar, what are the implications of relying on that, especially since there's nothing tangible like gold behind it anymore?
That's a huge point, and it loops back perfectly to why the system is so dependent on that idea of trust and belief.
How so?
Well, the Australian dollar, like pretty much all major currencies today, it has no intrinsic value. No gold, no silver, no basket of commodities backing it.
It's just paper or digits.
Essentially, yes. Backed by the government's decree that it's legal tender and everyone's collective agreement to accept it. Which means, in theory, the government or the central bank working with banks can create, well, infinite amounts of it.
Infinite money. Sounds good, but there's a catch.
A big catch. Inflation risk.
Yeah.
If too much money is created relative to the goods and services available, the purchasing power of every single dollar goes down. Your savings become worth less.
Right. And historically, how have fiat currencies fared?
History isn't kind to them, frankly. The source points out that, historically, all purely fiat currencies have eventually failed. They either collapse or hyperinflate away or are replaced.
All of them.
According to that analysis, yes, with an average lifespan, historically, of just 27 years.
Wow. That's sobering.
It is. It's a stark reminder of the potential fragility of systems built solely on public confidence and government decree, without any anchor to something tangible.
So, given all these parallels to a pyramid scheme, these fragilities with fiat currency, why does the system persist? What keeps it afloat despite the flaws the analysis highlights?
Well, there are a few key reasons interacting. First, as we discussed, unlike a pure pyramid scheme, it does actually facilitate real economic activity. It's not just shuffling money.
Okay, that's important.
Second, government enforcement is key. The law says you have to accept dollars for debts, pay taxes in dollars. That maintains public acceptance.
Inertia, almost.
Partly. Also, a big factor is simply that most people don't fully grasp how money creation really works. The mechanics we talked about earlier, not widely understood. So the system isn't broadly questioned on that fundamental level.
Ignorance is bliss, perhaps.
Or at least it allows the status quo to continue. And finally, let's be honest, there are very powerful vested interests, financial institutions, existing asset owners who benefit enormously from the current system.
And they have an incentive to keep it going.
A very strong incentive, yes.
But even with all that keeping it going, like any exponential system, surely it faces limits, long-term challenges.
Absolutely. It's not infinitely sustainable. There are inherent constraints.
Such as?
Well, debt servicing paying interest in principal takes up an ever-increasing slice of national income. At some point, households and businesses just can't take on more debt. New borrowers become harder to find.
The fuel runs low.
Exactly. Asset bubbles, too. They tend to burst eventually. It's happened repeatedly throughout history. That causes painful economic corrections.
And the trust factor.
That's perhaps the biggest vulnerability. Public trust, the very foundation of fiat money, can erode. And sometimes it can erode very, very quickly, leading to unpredictable outcomes, maybe even systemic crises.
The source doesn't just critique, though. Does it point towards any potential alternatives, ways to move beyond this debt-based model?
It does briefly mention a few possibilities for monetary reform looking toward the future.
Like what sort of ideas?
Things like sovereign money, where the government itself creates money debt-free, rather than private banks creating it as debt.
Okay.
Or full reserve banking, where banks would have to hold 100% reserves against deposits. They couldn't just create money through lending based on fractional reserves.
A much older model.
Yes. Then there's talk of public digital currency, maybe using blockchain tech, where the government provides digital cash directly, bypassing commercial banks for basic transactions.
Interesting. Any others?
And also looking at public banking models, like the Bank of North Dakota in the U.S., which is state-owned and focuses on local development, or China's state-owned banks funding massive infrastructure, or even looking back at the original public mission of Australia's own Commonwealth Bank before it was privatized.
So different ways of thinking about money creation and banking exist.
Definitely. These are alternatives being discussed.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does it all mean? We've gone through a pretty deep dive here into this analysis, this fascinating, maybe unsettling idea that Australia's money system has these structural echoes of a pyramid scheme. Understanding these dynamics seems pretty crucial, wouldn't you say, for everyday Australians, for policymakers, especially with all the economic uncertainty around?
Absolutely critical. As Australia grapples with these record debt levels, the cost of living, growing inequality, understanding the fundamental mechanics of our monetary system isn't just academic.
Right.
It's vital.
Yeah.
And this analysis, it suggests we might be in what it actually calls the final stages of this current monetary paradigm. That's a pretty heavy thought.
The final stages, what might that look like for you, for your finances? And maybe the final question for listeners to ponder is, what role does public awareness, just understanding this stuff, play in maybe shaping what comes next? What's the future of money?